Have you ever met someone who runs from love, not because they don't feel it, but because they feel it too deeply? Someone who hides behind distance, silence, and control, while their heart quietly burns for the very connection they fear. Behind every avoidant mask lies a storm of emotion, hidden, restrained, and powerful enough to shake their entire sense of self. Emotional projection is one of the most revealing signs that an avoidant is secretly obsessed with someone, even if they would never admit it. Beneath the surface of their calm exterior lies a complex storm of emotions they rarely acknowledge, let alone express. Avoidants are not devoid of feeling. They are, in fact, highly sensitive to emotional experiences. What sets them apart is the way they handle those emotions. When they begin to feel attached or drawn to someone, they often cannot process those feelings directly because intimacy threatens the fragile walls they've built for self-protection. Instead, their subconscious mind takes over and begins to project these hidden emotions outward, manifesting as behaviors that contradict their detached persona. Projection happens when internal emotions become too overwhelming to consciously own, so the mind finds indirect ways to express them. For an avoidant, this often takes the form of subtle jealousy, over-analysis, or emotional mirroring. They may find themselves irritated when you give attention to others, even though they insist they do not care. They may notice small details about you that others overlook, remembering what you said, what you wore, or what song you shared, even though they act indifferent. The truth is, these behaviors are not casual. They are the emotional fingerprints of suppressed attachment. When someone means nothing to them, the avoidant barely notices. When someone means too much, their subconscious cannot stop noticing. Avoidants often pride themselves on emotional independence and rational thinking, but when they become secretly obsessed, their behavior begins to betray them. They might withdraw suddenly after moments of closeness, as if they need to re-establish distance to feel safe again. This withdrawal is not rejection. It is emotional panic. The deeper they feel, the more their psyche rebels against vulnerability. Their obsession expresses itself in this constant tug-of-war, seeking closeness through thought, memory, and observation, yet resisting it in action. They begin to think about you when alone, replaying conversations, analyzing your reactions, or wondering how you perceive them. They will not say these things aloud, but their focus shifts inward toward you. You become an internal presence they can't quite shake, even if they convince themselves they're detached. This emotional projection can also appear through irritation or criticism. When an avoidant starts to care, their fear of exposure can make them hypercritical or defensive. They may project their own fear of rejection onto you, accusing you of being needy, emotional, or unpredictable. In truth, these are reflections of their own unacknowledged emotions. What they reject in you is often what they cannot face in themselves: the desire for closeness, the longing for emotional safety, the ache of vulnerability. So rather than admitting affection, they push it outward, disguising attachment as annoyance or superiority. It's their unconscious way of saying, "I feel too much, and it terrifies me." Their projection also shows up in mirroring. Without realizing it, they begin to align their tone, language, or even body language with yours. This mirroring is not manipulation, it's resonance. Deep emotional bonds often form through unconscious mimicry, and when an avoidant begins doing this, it's a quiet confession of emotional investment. They may also become unusually attuned to your moods, noticing shifts before anyone else does, or offering small gestures of care disguised as logic or convenience. Emotional projection in avoidance reveals how obsession doesn't always come from passion or impulse. It often comes from repression. What they cannot say with words finds its way through actions, glances, or inconsistencies. Their silence speaks. Their detachment pulses with meaning, and their resistance becomes the very proof of their emotional depth. Fear of vulnerability is one of the most defining characteristics of an avoidant individual, and it becomes even more pronounced when they develop deep feelings for someone. Beneath their calm surface lies a constant tension between longing and fear. They crave connection just like anyone else, but the thought of being emotionally exposed feels threatening to their sense of safety. Vulnerability to them equals danger. It opens the door to rejection, abandonment, or the loss of control they have worked so hard to maintain. So, when an avoidant becomes secretly obsessed with someone, their fear of vulnerability doesn't disappear. It intensifies. The closer they feel, the more they pull away, not because they care less, but because caring too much triggers their deepest insecurities. An avoidance relationship with vulnerability is shaped by early emotional experiences. Many have learned that closeness leads to pain, that expressing needs results in disappointment, or that love is conditional and unreliable. As adults, they protect themselves by adopting emotional independence as armor. When attraction or affection begins to grow, their psychological defenses activate automatically. Instead of leaning in, they distance themselves. They may become inconsistent, warm and present one moment, cold and withdrawn the next. This inconsistency is not manipulation. It is the visible struggle between desire and defense. They fear that letting someone see their softer side will lead to judgment or rejection, so they hide behind silence, logic, or self-reliance. When they are secretly obsessed with someone, this fear manifests in paradoxical ways. They may crave closeness, but create emotional barriers to prevent it. They might think about you constantly, but avoid reaching out. They can stare at your messages and not reply, not because they don't care, but because replying feels like surrendering control. To the outside world, their restraint looks like indifference, but internally it's turmoil. Every step toward you feels like a risk, every expression of care like a potential loss of self. The avoidance mind starts to overanalyze every interaction, searching for reasons to suppress what they feel. They convince themselves that they're better off detached, yet their emotions persist quietly in the background, haunting their solitude. Their fear of vulnerability also makes them seek safety in control. They try to control their emotions by detaching and controlling the relationship's pace, by limiting how much they give. When you get too close, they retreat to reset their emotional boundaries. This retreat isn't about losing interest, it's a coping mechanism. Emotional closeness threatens their sense of autonomy, so they find relief in solitude. However, once they are alone, their obsession often intensifies. They think about what you said, how you reacted, and whether you noticed their withdrawal. They long for connection, but only in ways that don't expose their vulnerability. This is why many avoidants show love through actions rather than words, by remembering small details, showing up when you least expect, or quietly ensuring your comfort. The deeper truth is that vulnerability requires trust, and trust is something an avoidant struggles to grant even to themselves. They may not believe they are capable of being loved for who they are, beyond their facade of strength or independence. This internal disbelief makes it hard for them to accept affection without suspicion. When they feel drawn to someone, their instinct is to test emotional boundaries, to push the person away and see if they stay. This test isn't conscious cruelty, it's a survival habit. They are trying to prove to themselves that love can exist without the threat of loss. Their obsession, then, is both emotional and psychological. It's not just about the person they desire, but about the internal battle they fight every time they feel something real. Fear of vulnerability turns their affection into something they both cherish and resist. They might appear calm, distant, or even uninterested, but inside they are in constant conflict. Their heart wants to connect, but their mind warns them to run. And so they hover in the space between closeness and distance, between obsession and denial, silently yearning for what they're too afraid to claim. Symbolic behavior is one of the most revealing ways an avoidant expresses hidden feelings. When an avoidant becomes emotionally attached but cannot admit it, their emotions find expression through indirect means, symbols, timing, habits, and patterns. They are rarely straightforward in their affection, because vulnerability threatens the walls they have built to survive emotionally. Instead, their subconscious begins to communicate in subtle gestures that speak louder than words. These gestures are often so understated that even they may not realize what they're doing. Yet, to an observant eye, their actions form a quiet, emotional language, one that replaces the confessions they are too afraid to make. Avoidants often use symbols because symbols feel safe. They can express meaning without direct confrontation. A song they share, a quote they post, or a phrase they repeat can carry hidden layers of emotion. When they cannot say, "I miss you," they might send or like something that mirrors what they feel. These small actions are fragments of their emotional truth filtered through their need for distance. They communicate through metaphor because literal expression feels dangerous. It's as if their heart speaks in code, hoping you will understand without forcing them to expose themselves. Their symbolism allows them to maintain control while still acknowledging the emotional undercurrent they can't ignore. When an avoidant is secretly obsessed, their attention becomes selective and meaningful. They may start showing up online around the same time you do, viewing your stories, or leaving small signs of presence without directly engaging. These actions are not random. They are ways of maintaining emotional proximity without the risks of direct connection. They want to stay close enough to feel connected but distant enough to remain safe. In their world, this is how they manage intimacy, by keeping it symbolic rather than tangible. They create invisible threads between themselves and the person they care about, weaving emotional closeness through observation rather than interaction. Symbolic behavior also manifests in how they remember and repeat small details. An avoidant who claims to be detached will still remember your favorite song, the story you told once, or the way you phrased something meaningful. They might reference it later in a casual context, pretending it's unimportant. But these references are not accidental. They reveal the depth of their attention and emotional engagement. Because avoidants live in their heads, their affection becomes mentalized. They think about it, replay it, and express it indirectly through association. Every repeated reference, every subtle imitation becomes a clue to what they truly feel beneath their restraint. Sometimes, their symbolic expressions are paradoxical. They may withdraw suddenly but then reappear with a small gesture that symbolizes connection, a thoughtful message, a song lyric, or a memory shared. This inconsistency confuses those who don't understand their psychology, but it's their way of maintaining a balance between desire and defense. They cannot sustain emotional exposure for long, so they communicate affection in intervals. When they feel too seen, they retreat. When they fear being forgotten, they reach out through symbols. It's an emotional rhythm that keeps them both connected and protected at the same time. Even their physical behavior holds symbolic weight. The way they linger a moment longer when near you, the way they mirror your tone or pacing, or the way they glance when they think you're not watching, all of these are non-verbal confessions. The avoidant personality hides behind subtlety, yet it's within those small subtleties that truth is revealed. Their body, tone, and silence become vessels of unspoken emotion. Silence itself becomes symbolic. It represents the space where they feel the most, but say the least. In essence, symbolic behavior is the language of the avoidance unconscious. It's how they reconcile two opposing needs, the longing for connection and the fear of exposure. Every indirect gesture, every pattern of subtle contact is an emotional signal disguised as coincidence. They do not express love in words or declarations, but in moments, symbols, and quiet choices that mean more than they dare to admit. Shadow attachment is one of the most powerful and hidden dynamics in an avoidance emotional world. It represents the attachment that lives beneath the surface of their consciousness, the love they deny, the longing they repress, and the dependency they refuse to acknowledge. When an avoidant is secretly obsessed with someone, what they outwardly reject often thrives inwardly. Their detachment is not the absence of feeling, but a defense against it. They push away what they desire most, not because it lacks meaning, but because it carries the potential to expose their deepest emotional wounds. The connection they form exists in the shadows of their psyche, where it can be felt intensely without having to be confronted. For an avoidant, attachment is never simple. On the outside, they present an image of independence, control, and self-sufficiency. They act as though they do not need anyone, but within that independence often lies a hidden dependency they refuse to face. When they become emotionally drawn to someone, this buried side of their nature begins to awaken. They may dream about the person, think of them during quiet moments, or experience sudden waves of emotion they can't explain. Yet instead of acknowledging these feelings, they bury them deeper. This suppression doesn't erase their attachment, it amplifies it. The more they try to ignore it, the stronger it becomes, feeding an internal conflict between what they consciously believe and what they unconsciously crave. The shadow attachment grows through denial. Every time they suppress affection, avoid contact, or convince themselves they don't care, their subconscious mind stores that emotion like unspent energy. Over time, that energy gathers intensity. They may find themselves irrationally affected by your absence or strangely reactive when reminded of you. They might avoid your presence but secretly check for updates, ask about you through others, or scroll through memories that reignite what they've tried to forget. These are not conscious decisions. They are the compulsions of an emotional shadow that refuses to disappear. This hidden attachment is fueled by fear. To the avoidant, love represents loss of control, and control is their primary form of safety. By denying the attachment, they maintain a sense of autonomy, but the emotional cost is high. Their mind becomes divided. One part of them longs for connection, while the other fights to keep it at bay. This internal split leads to behaviors that appear contradictory. They might act indifferent, yet feel a deep ache when you pull away. They might tell themselves they are better off alone, yet every reminder of you stirs emotion they can't suppress. Their obsession is rarely loud or visible. It exists as a quiet pull they can't escape, a psychological loop where desire and denial feed each other endlessly. The shadow attachment also explains why avoidants often return after periods of withdrawal. They may disappear for weeks or months, convincing themselves they've moved on, only to reappear suddenly as if drawn by something beyond logic. What brings them back is not conscious decision, but emotional gravity, the part of them that remains tethered to the connection they've never fully processed. They come back not because they're ready to be vulnerable, but because the shadow side of their attachment keeps them from letting go completely. Their reappearance is rarely accompanied by confession or clarity. It's just another attempt to feel close while maintaining distance. This hidden attachment can also manifest in emotional projection. They might criticize or minimize your importance outwardly to protect their ego while inwardly being consumed by thoughts of you. They will not admit to caring, but their actions reveal otherwise. Their need to suppress emotions often transforms into fascination. They observe, remember, and imagine scenarios in silence. The more they repress, the more their emotional shadow takes control. Shadow attachment is the part of an avoidant psyche that loves without permission. It exists in the places they try not to look, in the memories they revisit alone, and in the emotions they cannot explain away. Their detachment is the mask, their obsession is the truth beneath it. And though they may never say it aloud, their silence often carries the weight of everything they're too afraid to feel in the light. Control as connection is one of the most paradoxical behaviors in an avoidant when they are secretly obsessed with someone. To most people, control seems cold, detached, or manipulative. But for an avoidant, control is not about domination, it is about emotional survival. When an avoidant forms a deep attachment, the intensity of their feelings threatens their sense of safety. They have learned to associate vulnerability with pain, closeness with loss, and dependence with danger. So rather than surrendering to connection, they manage it. They regulate the emotional distance, set the rhythm of interaction, and decide when and how to engage. This control allows them to feel safe enough to stay connected without being overwhelmed. It becomes their version of intimacy, structured, measured, and always slightly out of reach. When an avoidant becomes secretly obsessed, their need for control intensifies. They do not stop thinking about the person they care about, but they try to control how much those thoughts affect their behavior. They may resist reaching out, suppress their impulses, and convince themselves that they are indifferent. Yet this self-restraint is not detachment. It is an emotional management system designed to keep their feelings from spilling over. The obsession grows quietly under the surface while they maintain a calm exterior. They might control when they see you, how long they talk, or what topics they discuss, not because they lack interest, but because predictability helps them feel emotionally grounded. Their rules and boundaries are shields against the fear of losing themselves in someone else. Control also becomes a way to test emotional safety. They might withdraw to see how you respond, delay replies to gauge your patience, or maintain physical distance to measure how much you care. These tests are not conscious manipulation, but psychological defense mechanisms. They are searching for proof that connection can exist without danger, that someone can stay without suffocating them. Every moment of distance they create is their attempt to control potential rejection before it happens. By being the one to step back first, they avoid the risk of being abandoned later. It is their way of rewriting the past pain of dependency. This time, they decide when the emotional exposure begins and when it ends. Even when they seem emotionally distant, the avoidant's mind remains deeply engaged with the person they care about. They analyze conversations, overthink interactions, and mentally rehearse how to maintain the upper hand. This mental control gives them the illusion of stability in a relationship that feels otherwise unpredictable. They cannot admit how much they care, but they also cannot let go. Their attempts to manage the connection, by defining boundaries, dictating pace, or deciding when to reconnect, are not signs of disinterest, but of hidden attachment. They remain tethered to the person through structure and restraint. For them, control is the bridge between emotional chaos and emotional connection. When the avoidant pulls away, it is often not an act of rejection, but an act of regulation. They need space to regain control over their emotions before they can return. During this distance, they might still keep tabs on you from afar, observing without interacting. This silent observation allows them to stay connected while maintaining control. They may reappear once they feel safe again, often acting as if nothing happened because acknowledging their emotional instability would feel too exposing. The pattern of withdrawal and return becomes their unspoken rhythm of love. They cannot sustain closeness for long, but they also cannot tolerate complete disconnection. Control gives them a sense of power in situations where emotions make them feel powerless. It allows them to love without losing autonomy, to care without admitting dependency. The irony is that what looks like emotional detachment is often a desperate attempt to hold on without falling apart. Through control, they stay connected to the person who occupies their thoughts, using boundaries as a way to feel secure in a bond they cannot fully embrace. Their obsession hides behind composure, but every controlled action, every calculated silence, and every measured return is proof that they are deeply, silently, and fearfully invested. An avoidance love story is not told through words or grand gestures. It unfolds in silence, hesitation, and contradiction. What looks like indifference often conceals intensity. What feels like distance is their fragile attempt to protect what they hold most dear. They do not fall in love easily, and when they do, it challenges everything they believe about safety and control. Their obsession hides behind restraint, their affection behind fear, and their vulnerability behind logic. Yet within that quiet struggle lies a truth far deeper than denial. Their avoidance is not the absence of love, but the evidence of how profoundly they feel it. To love an avoidant is to see beyond what is said and listen to what their silence reveals, because sometimes the loudest proof of love is found in the spaces where words refuse to go.